No mai, haere mai, tēnā koutou, I tēnei ahi ahi. Welcome and good evening, everybody. My name is Margaret, and my role as convener of the Housing Action Group, focusing on sustainability, to welcome you all and ensure the smooth running of the meeting. So no pressure. Thank you for attending this very special meeting, which is part of our program to explore alternative housing options. Tonight's topic is a slight twist on that theme, being seed saving, which is what you all came to hear about, not from me. But I'm here to do the housekeeping. So in keeping with level 1 COVID restrictions, I assume you all took advantage of the hand sanitizer at the door. You're not putting your hands in your pockets and stopping summer, are you? Like the ad says? No, you don't watch television. Right. As you booked your place here tonight, that is sufficient for the tracing process, actually. And I noticed some of you taking photos of that pretty picture on the door, so that's good too. In the event of a fire, those on this side go out the door that you came in on. On this side, it's a bit like being on an aeroplane. The door's behind those two blinds there. Are you okay to chuck them out?
Yeah.
Okay. So this side will go out that way. And the assembly point is the car park beside the mall there. Toilets can be found down the hallway here towards the shop door. Do not go into the shop door. I generally say because the alarm makes an excruciating noise. It's actually two boards meeting in there tonight. They wanted this room, but I said no. In the event of an earthquake, drop, cover and hold. Yep, good luck with that.
I'm not racing anywhere, Mum.
You're not racing anywhere? There's no room for two under there. Okay, but you also need to move away from the glassed area, which is everywhere actually. So the foyer is probably the closest. When the shaking stops, we'll reassess the situation. Yes, that won't be too bad. Mine's screen. Finally, would you raise your hand, please, if this is the first time you have visited this venue? Thank you, and 1,000 welcomes to you all. Take note, South Alive is very proud of its venue, and we welcome newcomers all the time. That was about 8 new ones. So we've had, this is our 8th evening, and we've had new ones every time, so that's wonderful. For your information, the presentation is going to be filmed and will eventually appear on the South Alive YouTube channel. But you, the audience, will not be in the film. For privacy reasons, that makes it okay for you. I don't have to get your written permission. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Jules, one of our wonderful staff members here at South Alive, who's going to explain the kaupapa for the evening. Thank you, Jules.
Thank you, Margaret. Morena, I'm Jules Orr. I'm the projects manager here at South Alive. And one of the projects I look after is the Food Secure Communities project. So this project, so we got some funding last year, fortunately, through MSD, to look at the South Invercargill community and to come up with initiatives to help make things more food secure. So we've done a few things to date. We have built some prototype planter boxes, and those of you that haven't seen them before, they're in the foyer, and we've asked people's opinions on how would they be in urban gardens, would they work, who would they work for, as we look at different ways to enable people to garden and to enjoy gardening, firstly to grow food, but also for their mental health and well-being, to get that satisfaction. So that's one of the things we've done so far, and we've talked to groups like those that were at the last urban gardening workshop and the Spirit Army families about what they'd like. And one of the things that definitely came out of our last workshop, where we had a snippet there from Nick, Kiddey and other speakers, was people really keen to know some more about seed saving. So here we are tonight, and so the Food Secure Communities funding is funding this event tonight. We've also worked with local schools, we've provided some fruit trees, and I'm also working with a Kai Collective leadership group that Nick's involved with as well, that's looking at the Southland food system and ways we can lobby council, including Invercargill City Council, so that food security is prioritised. So that might be through council plantings or encouraging healthy eating or reducing food waste. All those things help for sustainable food systems. So that's that kind of higher level stuff that we're involved with too. Post-COVID, everything tells us that regional food systems like learning to garden, getting gardening skills, all help us to look at more regional food systems, because thinking of how things were all disrupted when we were in lockdown, it really made everyone look at that again. Nick might have a moment to talk about the Longwood Loop, which is something they're doing over Western Southland as well, around a regional food system in between everything else. So we as South Alive, a community-led development organisation, we want to encourage you, our families, to learn gardening skills. We want you to feel that you can access our community gardens. We want you to know about our beautification group, our fruit and nut groups, and learn about food security by being involved. Another example with us, with the fruit and nut group, is the lovely orchards that are around South Invercargill, and please come to me later if you don't know where they are and I'll give you a map. But you can get involved in this group too in the form of working bees. They're very knowledgeable people, and currently there is underplanting such as strawberries and currants that at times of the year are there for food foraging. So another food foraging is another thing that will help with food security in the community. So another thing obviously we really want to be a part of is educating our community. So that's why we're here tonight on the topic of seed saving. It was a topic of interest that obviously our community wanted to know more about after the Urban High Gardening workshop late last year. So we have a couple of speakers tonight. We have Nick Kiddey from South Coast Environment Centre in Riverton, and he's got an amazing amount of knowledge that he's going to share with us. So he's going to talk to us for around 40 minutes, and then I'm going to welcome Anna and Margaret, and they're just going to facilitate some discussion amongst yourselves around seed saving and gardening and those things that you want to talk about as well. So it's educative, but this particular session we also have a chance to sort of talk about those burning things and share the knowledge in the room tonight. So I hope you have a good evening, and I think there's also supper, which is always good as well, and amongst everything else. So enjoy your evening, and we're here for questions about anything in general about South Alive or anything we can help with throughout the night. Okay, so I hand over to Nick.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jules. Kia ora koutou. So I'm Nick Kiddey, and as Jules mentioned, I work at South Coast Environment Centre, Riverton Environment Centre, and I've been gardening for 25 years and involved with seed saving and permaculture that whole time, and super lucky now to be in a position where I can do things like this, come and talk to groups of keen people. It's really it's kind of what makes things really meaningful, is being able to engage with people and pass on stuff that I've learnt from other people that I've learnt it from, because everything I've got to share, I've learnt it a lot of from other people as well. So I think it's really nice to be able to kind of pass on that on a little bit. So I've just got a slideshow that I will bring up. Hopefully. Any minute now. I've also got, just while we're trying to figure this out, I brought a bunch of stuff with me that I thought people might like to get a little hands-on with. I haven't got quite as much as I was hoping, just because it's still a little bit early in the season and it's been pretty wet, so it's got stuff at home that's still ripening in the garden, but I brought with me tonight some blue lupins, which need processing. If anybody wants to grab a handful and pop some out while I'm talking, that'd be totally cool. Yes, there you go. Got some takers in the front, so just be just got to be careful with them because the ends of them are really pointy and really sharp. But the best way to pop these things out, actually the best way to do it is to leave them in the sun, and they tend to pop open on their own. But give it a little twist, and then you can pop it open, and then you can just chuck them back in the bag. And like hold full. Yes. Get into it. What else have I got? I've got a bag of cress seed, and I've got daikon radish, fabulous radish, garlic, which doesn't have seeds in the kind of formal sense, some wheat that just grow in our garden because we feed our chickens sprouted wheat and there's always some escapes from the chickens. So I just brought that along out of interest really. It's not something we grow a lot of. Although we have got a friend who she just dug up a small portion of her lawn, probably only about 10 square metres, and grew a fabulous crop of wheat. Made a bunch of loaves of bread out of it. It's pretty cool. It's not, not producing a lot of food, but it's quite satisfying. And I've also got coriander, really easy to save seed from, and I like the leaf too, the cilantro, but the crushed seed to me is just amazing. And that's quite special too, because there's not that many spices that you can grow in your garden, lots of herbs, but spices aren't that common, but coriander is super easy to grow and fabulous seed. Fabulous to use. And lentils. My wife sprouted some lentils and we didn't eat them all, so she just chucked them in the garden and we've got a great little crop of lentils. Those little seed pods on there. Actually, you can hear them rattling around the side. Yeah. So that's pretty cool. Right.
Lovely, thank you very much, Lee. You're going to take them home and grow them.
Thank you.
Righto, anyway, I also brought some tomatoes too, because tomatoes are really easy to save seeds from. So these are a tomato that we're growing outside of our place and it's produced really well, so I'm really keen to get some of those. Those of you who were here when I did my Where Food Fit talk, I brought along some buckets that had tomatoes planted in them, and so these are these little golden cherry tomatoes are growing from those buckets and they're producing really well. But these outdoor tomatoes are producing first, way before these ones started producing, which I thought was quite interesting.
Are they like a heritage variety or just
These ones here I got a 6-pack from Mitre 10,
yeah.
just to plant some buckets with.
Yeah.
This one here is called Early Girl, and that's sometimes considered to be like a heritage variety.
And they grow outside?
They do. Yeah.
And you
really,
just
really well.
put the seed onto brown paper and let it
Yep,
dry?
we'll get on to that.
Okay,
We'll do that in a minute.
Right.
And in front here I've also got, because I didn't want to just focus on vegetables, because my wife's got a little nursery and one of the things we're doing a lot of is growing fruit trees from seed, nut trees from seed. And it is really easy. And when I see $40 trees for sale, I'm like, oh, it's prohibitive for a lot of people. So this is an apple tree that's been grown from seed. This is one that somebody dug up from under their apple tree and gave to us. So this is funny looking. And interesting thing about apples, I'll get to that in a minute, but hazelnut, it's just 1 year. It's not very happy, it's been in a pot. We've got them growing in the ground, where we planted them in the ground, and they're like this tall, looking really good.
Found it.
This one here is super interesting. This is called gavwena. Don't know if anybody has ever heard of a gavwena. It's sometimes called a southern macadamia. It produces a nut. It's about, they wouldn't get to be maybe half the size of a macadamia, but they produce really well in Southland. These are grown from seeds from Eastern Cemetery. The Eastern Cemetery's got some really good edible plantings in it. It's shamefully lacking plantings. In my previous job, I spent a lot of time walking around the cemetery, and it was just embarrassing how much plastic rubbish there is floating around, and the creek is full of plastic. It's just awful. And there's this tiny handful of really interesting, amazing plants, but there's so much space and so much scope. I don't know if any of you have ever seen articles of people who've beautified cemeteries around the country and around the world. Amazing wildflowers growing through them.
Poppies are a good one too.
Absolutely. I mean, no reason why not, but it's just mowed and sprayed. Tragic, really. So gavwena nut, excellent choice for Southland. There's one in Queen's Park as well, just to the north, to the west of the Band Rotunda. Produces nuts. You go and have a look. They're like in a red. They look like a red fruit, and they fall off and they kind of crack open. You can crack them out. They're quite yummy. But that's that. This is a feijoa grown from seed. That's one season old. It's like 6 months old. So that's coming along really nicely. No idea if it's going to produce good fruits or not. Just wait and see, really. This one is a white strawberry, which is the best strawberry. Anybody's ever had a white strawberry?
Are they the wild ones?
Kind of, yep. They self-seed and spread, and they just form a clump. They don't make runners, but they're the best strawberry. Once you've ever had a ripe white strawberry, you'll be like, yeah, the red ones, they're okay, but...
Are these ones actually white?
Yeah. They kind of go sort of slightly creamy yellow when they're ripe, but they're just incredible. And they get some of them get quite big, not big like big strawberries. That's a raspberry grown from seed as well. So back to the apple. Interesting thing about fruit trees from seed, that some fruit trees will grow true from a seed, which more or less means that you pick a golden queen peach, you eat the peach, you plant the stone, the tree that grows will produce something very like a golden queen peach. If you get a golden delicious apple, eat it, and then plant the pip from that, you won't necessarily get anything like a golden delicious apple. So they are super genetically diverse. And what has happened typically over the centuries is that people have found a variety that they like, and they're like, this is a good one. So they take cuttings of it and they'll graft it on something else, and it's the same tree as the last one, and we still like it, so we're going to keep taking cuttings. So effectively what that means is that the Kentish fill basket that's in Robin's garden in Riverton is genetically exactly the same tree as the Kentish fill basket in 1684 where that cutting was taken from. So in those 300, 400 years, there's been no opportunity for that apple to express itself, its genetics, differently. So one of the things I like about growing them from seed is that it kind of like reawakens that latent genetic diversity that's inside that apple, so that that tree that produced in 1645 can go, and express itself in a different way. And that's one of the reasons why there's apples on just about every part of the planet, because they're so diverse that something will suit wherever they end up. So, you plant a bunch of apple seeds, and out of the 100 you plant, you might find one that's really good for where you are. And that's going to be a new variety. You can call it Nick's favourite or something like that. Whatever you like, yeah. But people tend to have a sort of the attitude that it's not worth doing. It's like if you spend $40 and you buy a Golden Delicious, you know what you've got. It's a done deal really, and it's going to produce relatively quickly. But if you grow an apple apple from a seed from the Golden Delicious, it might take 10 years to fruit, and in 10 years you might go, stink, it's not a very nice fruit. Yeah, but you can always graft something else onto it at that point. So you just cut it down and then graft on one you do like. So it's never really a waste, in my opinion anyway. No, that's okay. I'll just talk through it. That's alright. Yeah, I'll just talk through it. I'll just try and be engaging enough that you're not like, I wanted to watch the slideshow. And this is a citrus in here. Don't know what. I'm not sure where. I can't even remember what seed we planted. We just found it growing in another pot with something else. And obviously we get a bit carried away at the moment. We've got like 6 different types of plum seed, and we've got nectarine seed, peach seed, apricot seeds, lots of different apple seeds, and they're all like on the windowsill and in jars and bags, and they've got stuff written on them, and then we need to get around to doing something with them, but I'll get back to that. But yeah, so this is just a little random citrus. It looks quite good. It's got a leaf shape a little bit like a kaffir lime. It's sort of like a twin kind of a leaf like that. It's quite aromatic as well, so it could be nice to be one of those, but who knows, real healthy looking. It's good. And there's also a bit of a school of thought, and I honestly don't know if there's any science behind this, that when you graft a tree onto a rootstock, that it somehow kind of inhibits the full potential of the tree, whereas if you grow a tree on its own roots, there's nothing getting in the way. It's just roots to tips, but with the graft, it's sort of like there's always a point in there where the 2 different bits have met, and they often take really, really well, but is there something in there that's holding them back? I don't know.
The resistance.
Yeah. So anyway, at the Environment Centre we do a bunch of different projects. We've got the Longwood Loop, which Jules mentioned earlier on, which is Western Southland, kind of a travelling farmers market, and we've done 4 runs of that. And the idea behind that is that the producer and the consumer get to more or less deal directly through a central point, but one person can buy from multiple different growers and just make one transaction to do it, and the grower knows exactly what they've sold before they even go to harvest it. So unlike a traditional farmers market, you harvest all your stuff, you go to the farmers market, you've got 100 lettuces, and only 10 people want a lettuce that day, and then 90 lettuces go to waste. The idea with the software for the Longwood Loop will be that 10 people say, I'd like a lettuce please, and the person who's growing the lettuces goes, great, I'll harvest 10 lettuces. And then the rest can stay in the garden. So that's quite exciting. That's just kicked off. We run our Heritage Harvest Festival, which people may or may not have heard. We've decided not to run in the traditional format this year, which is a bit of a disappointment, but probably not unexpected, I suspect, the situation we're in with COVID-19. So we're still going to be having stuff going on in Riverton, but we needed to be a little bit more responsive to possible changes in levels, so we won't have the hall and all of the stuff going on in the hall, but we'll still be running some workshops, and we'll still have tours of the Guyton's Forest Garden and other activities happening in Riverton that weekend. So it's still worth coming out for the weekend. We're also going to be putting a lot of our workshops and things online as well, and it's a big learning curve for us to figure that out, but we embrace it and see what we can make of it. It's exciting. What else we do? I tend to do education stuff. I do quite a bit with schools. I've done seed saving workshops at Upper Ema College. I've talked to schools about planting fruit trees in schools. I can't remember what else. It's all on the slide, doesn't it?
No,
Everybody probably knows
you can look at your
the
slide.
environment
Sorry
anyway.
about that.
Keep going with that seed harvesting. That's awesome.
It's going to take him 40 minutes, but he's fine.
I've got heaps more. Don't feel like you've got to make that bowl last 40 minutes. So, seed saving. It's an interesting thing. If you think about, on one hand, you've got the notion of seed saving from a botanical perspective, which is cut and dried. It's really simple, really straightforward. A plant is pollinated by something, it produces seeds, you collect the seeds. Right, so that's saving the seeds off that plant. It's more or less collecting the seed. And then there's the other side of it, which is the notion of kind of rescuing something. And a lot of people get kind of drawn into seed saving through this idea of like rescuing seeds. And that, I think, often that tends to lead to a bit of disappointment, because the reality doesn't always match up with the kind of romantic notion that we might have of what that means. And I'm kind of getting a little bit out of order, but if you just leave it like that, and I'll just read it from there. That'd be great. There's always some kind of technical issue. It could be worse, couldn't it?
The computer could be broken.
Oh, okay, so just before I crack on, actually, I'll mention one of our projects at the Environment Centre is the Seed Savers Network. And that was started in 1999 by a guy from Ojai called Henry Harrington. And he's become a bit of a legend in seed saving circles. He had a massive collection of food plants that he was saving the seeds from every year, and just this huge collection. A lot of them came from his grandparents, who were early settlers in Akaroa, and so they had a lot of varieties with them that they had brought. They were French, so they brought from France in the 1840s and had grown them in their gardens, and he'd grown up with them, and he had a lot of those varieties and has since spread those seeds out. He's passed away since then, but he sent his seeds to various organisations around the country for them to grow them on and keep them alive. And he brought a bunch of seeds into the Environment Centre in 1999, and that's what sort of kicked off the Southland Seed Savers Network. So there's this huge collection of seeds arrived. And what's happened over the years is that huge collection of seeds has gradually dwindled, smaller and smaller and smaller, for various reasons. But that's kind of one of the things that I'm hoping that we can talk about and kind of work out some action around. I'll get back to that again. But what we try to do with the Seed Savers Network is to make seeds available that are grown in coastal Otago and Southland to people in coastal Otago and Southland to grow. The idea being that if you grow seeds that have been grown in your bioregion for a certain amount of time, they kind of develop a vigour for your local climate. If you go to most garden centres now and you buy King's seeds or Egmont seeds, whatever, most of those seeds aren't grown in New Zealand. They're coming from California, they're coming from Italy. So we tend to be a little bit different climate-wise to California. So people have found that you plant the seeds in your garden and they don't always do as well as you expect. And a lot of seed savers have been kind of spurred on by that idea of actually we really should be able to supply ourselves with seeds, especially when we had a big lockdown last year. Most of the online seed companies had to close because they couldn't keep up with the demand, and they were having trouble getting stock in because it's hard. You're part of the international supply chain, and it's prone to the same shocks as food or any kind of goods. So it's easy to think to yourself, food producing is going to build resilience, but if you haven't got a good sustainable seed supply, then you're not going to have much luck actually growing food. So our Seed Savers Network needs a bit of rejuvenation, really. It's relied heavily on goodwill of people sending seeds back, and for whatever reason, that's not always possible. It could be that you plant something and, despite your best efforts, it gets eaten by a pest, or you have an unseasonable frost, or something like that, and you just can't get the seeds back. And so over the years, the variety and number of seeds that we have available has really declined. So this notion of rescuing seeds, and that's where we get into the terminology of like heritage and heirloom, and that carries a lot of kind of emotional baggage along with it. And oftentimes that's kind of misplaced. A lot of that feeling of, they're the best ones. Actually, there's lots of modern varieties that are way more nutritious and way tastier than lots of heritage and heirloom varieties of things. and that will cope with pest attacks better and whatnot, because modern plant breeding actually is really good at developing varieties that have certain characteristics. Much of the time that's focused around producing stuff that will store, transport, nutrient content isn't necessarily a high priority for a lot of growers. It's, my tomatoes don't need to be the most nutritious, they just need to be the ones that will get from here through all of those trucks to that sorting centre in there, and then to that supermarket there and there and there and there, and still look good on the shelf so people want to buy them. So that's where a lot of that seed breeding focus has gone, but actually a lot has gone into nutrition as well and taste. And so I always take it with a pinch of salt when somebody tells me that heritage or heirloom varieties always taste better. That's actually, I don't think that's actually true at all. Apart from anything else, taste is so subjective, right? So you tell me that tastes better, but I don't necessarily agree. So I think we have to be a little bit cautious about getting tied up in that kind of stuff when we're talking about seed saving, and try and keep it a bit more focused. So I can't really show you this, but here's a little example. There's a bunch of beans. I just got 4 photos of 4 different kinds of beans. These speckled. They're so interesting, and beans are often one of the first things that people kind of get drawn to with seed saving, because they look amazing, some of them. They're just incredible. There's one there that's called Ojo de Gabra, I think, which is like goat's eye. There's all these amazing patterns and things on them, and they have these huge stories associated with them. People are like, oh. But most of those bean varieties are from incredibly hot, incredibly dry parts of the central United States and Central America, and actually don't suit coastal Otago and Southland at all. So on the one hand, there's kind of this idea that we should be preserving as many varieties as we possibly can, but on the other hand, there's actually this, well, why don't we just preserve the ones that actually work for us, that we know are actually good, and all the rest of them, well, that's great. Those people who live in those climates where those work really, really well should be growing those ones. So we have to kind of temper our enthusiasm a little bit with like, well, what's actually practical, what's feasible, what's going to work for us. And there's people in New Zealand who are working on kind of opening these genetics up a little bit, like with beetroot, for example. And so they're actually crossbreeding as many different types of beetroot as possible, which the sort of heritage or heirloom purists would be like, no, you're going to lose all of those varieties. There's 20 different types of beetroot you could be growing. And these people are going, yeah, I'm going to grow them all at the same time and cross-pollinate them all so that all of their genetics can be fully expressed. And I end up with the most diverse range of plants that will cope well in any kind of situation. And they might not all be perfectly round and red, spherical and red. They might not all be perfectly long and red. There might be a mixture of those things. But they'll all produce beetroot, and the ones that you really like, you go, I want to save some seeds from those. So, that's kind of what they call a land race type, where you've got masses of genetic diversity, and people are encouraging that to happen. Because otherwise, what's happening is that we used to have this many types of beetroot, and then over the years, there's fewer and fewer varieties of beetroot available. And so the purists would say we need to preserve those varieties and make sure we don't lose them. And yet, of course, we need to do that, because if you lose them, then you lose all the genes from them. But if you mix those genes together again, you can end up back here again. That's how the genetic mix-up kind of needs to happen to really reinvigorate a lot of those varieties. So why would we save seeds? Well, one reason is to keep varieties alive that we like. And that's why there are so many now, because so many people all over the world are like, this is the best beetroot, I want to grow this. This suits all my needs. It's perfect for slicing into salads, or it's perfect for bottling in jars, or, so I want to keep this one going. And somebody on the other side of town was doing the same thing with their one, and they had different characteristics they liked about it. And so over the years, we end up with all these different varieties that have all these different characteristics. And certainly with brassicas like cauliflower and cabbage and broccoli, there's a huge diversity of those, and they crossbreed like nobody's business. So they're incredibly complex to keep growing. Ensuring diversity is a good point. If we are all growing seeds, then chances are we will all have some seeds that somebody can grow in their garden. If we're all relying on one company to import seed from one place in one part of the world, then we're incredibly vulnerable to anything that might happen anywhere along that chain. That resilience is really good. Building that local vigour, like I mentioned before, so having varieties that have grown for long enough in your climate that they're kind of used to the conditions and they will perform well in those conditions. And you get rid of the ones that don't produce well. That's a really important part of seed saving, is not saving seeds from things as well. And developing new varieties, we have to save seeds in order to develop new varieties and develop these land races where we can get maximum genetic diversity in there. And avoiding costs is another really good one. That's half the reason we do it, because I don't want to have to keep going and buying seeds every year. Some of them is just so easy to do, like the lupins that you're cranking away at. Ridiculous.
You have the last two, maybe last one.
Bag around somewhere. Get rid of it. So, but why would we not save seeds? Well, actually, it can be really difficult. It can take lots of space in your garden that you might otherwise want to be devoting to just growing food. It can take lots of careful planning. It can be tricky to store seeds properly. That's something else we've struggled with at the Environment Centre as well, is that we've got lots of seeds. They need to be kept stored in specific conditions, and if you can't provide those correct conditions, then the seeds deteriorate. From the very moment that they come off the plant, they start to deteriorate. Sometimes people don't save seeds because they don't want the feeling of obligation or the feeling of guilt that can go with that. Like, people often won't get seeds from seed exchanges or seed savers networks because they don't necessarily have the confidence to grow the seeds and return them. They don't have the confidence that nothing will happen in between planting it and harvesting it, and they don't want to kind of take that risk. And so rather than take it and give it a go, oftentimes seeds will just sit and get older and older and just become unviable because people just didn't feel confident enough to get them and have a go. But it can also be actually really easy. And there's certain things that are super easy to grow, and everybody should be growing, really, at some point in their garden. And I'll get to that in a minute. It can be done without lots of planning. When we don't carefully plan all of this, most of it's just like random occurrences and kind of good luck that it ends up happening. Ideally, we've only been gardening at our place for 3 years, so our gardens are still developing, and we're on a really low income, so we're just pumping out as much food as we possibly can, and that means that it's quite a big ask to stop harvesting something in order to save the seeds from it, especially when you can buy a packet of seeds for $3 and it's got like 1,000 carrot seeds in it, and it's just so easy to sort of think, well, we'll just eat all of the carrots and then we can get another cheap packet of seeds. So there's this constant balancing act going on, really. But it can be really, really satisfying and really fun, and it's a really cool way of kind of building community and building community resilience by working with other people. It's got heaps of cool potential. I did a slide there looking at where it fits. So those of you who came to my last talk when I had my sketch of kind of like the urban area and all these different ways you could produce food within it. Seed saving can fit within a bunch of settings in that kind of matrix. So thinking about an urban setting, you could be in your backyard, perfect place to be doing that. Community gardens, great. Schools, also great places to be saving seeds. So certain seeds suit those kinds of conditions. That's your more sort of intensive gardening, is where you can do your best seed saving. But then wilder places too, like harvest walks or forest gardens, lots of stuff will self-seed in those gardens, mostly the more kind of wild plants, but that also tend to be edible plants as well. But they're just the more weedy stuff that we don't have to worry about saving seeds from because they've kind of got it sorted themselves. They don't need humans to be looking around with them. They're just like, awesome, I'm just going to grow, I don't care. It's when it comes to our personal values, that's why we have to be involved. Because as soon as we decide that we really like cauliflower, and we really like broccoli, and we like cabbage, and we like kale, and we like Brussels sprouts, we like all of those things, but if we left them to their own devices, they'd all end up being the same thing, more or less. They'd end up being some probably big, stalky, leafy thing with some flower buds on it. It'll be a collar, broccoli, kale, sprout or something like that, you know. Because that's what they want to do. They just want to like mix it up like crazy, those plants, all together, and they will if they get a chance. So it's up to us to kind of go, well, if I like those things, then I have to figure out a way of making sure that I can keep growing them. And that's where it gets complicated.
Question, sorry.
Yep.
So how exactly do they mix? Like I don't understand how a cauliflower and a broccoli can turn into a broccoli cauliflower plant.
That's a great question. Cool. So when they're flowering, the pollen gets carried from one to the other. Yeah. So it's the bees or hoverflies or whatever visit, and they love, bees especially love the flowers of all of that family of plants. And they'll go visit your broccoli when it's flowering, and then they'll go, you know, another time and they'll visit your neighbour's cauliflowers that are flowering, and then they're swapping the pollen over. And the plant isn't discriminating at all. It's just like, cool, some genetics that I'm going to do something with. And so you don't know, you wouldn't know until you've got the seed and you've sown the seed, and then it comes up and you're not sure what you've got, and you know, and it just kind of opens up from there, really. Yeah, it's fascinating. So that's specific challenges around certain varieties of things that we like to grow. And those brassicas are a classic example. Not only do you need to have like massive isolation or isolation from pollinating insects, like insect-proof caging, but you need 300 broccoli plants to be flowering to make sure that you've got enough genetic diversity within that you can keep that type of broccoli going on and on.
Does that mean that every cauliflower I buy from, the seeds in a packet come from some sort of an insect-proof greenhouse where they're developed?
Well, maybe, but it's probably more likely that it's just a massive field that's 10 k's away from any other field of that family of plants.
Wow.
Yeah. So you think about Southland, masses of kale growing all over the region, and masses of it growing, falling off the seed truck, growing in ditches and whatnot. And if you're trying to grow that precious broccoli in your garden, those bees, they're travelling a bunch of kilometres, and they could be visiting any number of farmers' paddocks on the way, and so it's incredibly difficult to do. Other things like pumpkins and squash and that kind of thing, they cross promiscuously as well. So they, when one's flowering, the other's flowering. The bumblebees love them, and they'll go in here and they'll go in there, and the bumblebees don't care. They're just like all about the pollen and the nectar. And the plants are just kind of like, whatever. They just want to spread their pollen around. That pumpkin plant doesn't care whether there's 200 different varieties of pumpkin. That pumpkin plant just cares that its pollen gets taken to another pumpkin plant. And then it grows something else again. So it's only the human value that actually means anything, really, when it comes to seed saving.
It's like this year I had a big garden, and I just let everything go to seed. And then in my horticulture garden, I've got hundreds and hundreds of baby silver beets coming up. There's hundreds of them.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, so I'm like, damn, what do I do for them?
Yeah. So that's perfect, right?
Yeah.
You're pulling out plants instead of trying to grow them and plant them. Like that's how food production should be. That kind of wilding of stuff is fantastic. But you've got to let go a little bit. What variety of silver beet is it?
I don't know.
And does it matter?
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Does it taste good?
Yeah, well, I think so.
Totally, right? And it self-seeds like crazy, so it sounds to me like an excellent variety. So whether that's Ford Hook Giant or giant silver mid-rib or whatever. It doesn't actually matter. It's like a really good one that grows really well and self-seeds really, really well. So
That's what you want.
that's actually the most important thing. Other challenges with seeds like parsnip seeds, they just don't last. Like 1 year, if you haven't got them back in the ground, forget about it. It's all over. So in a way, you've got to have parsnips going to seed every year, so you've got really fresh seeds for the following year. It's a shame you can't see this. I put quite a lot of effort into this, but we'll put it online. This is my my matrix that shows you the green ones are the real easy ones that everybody should be growing. The orange ones are like they've got some challenges, and the red ones are like kind of more or less forget about it. So green, we've got lettuce, parsley, tomatoes, climbing beans. Good as. Okay. The orange variety, and like this is a bit different to what you mentioned, but I put silver beet on there, or shard. The main reason being that you need to have at least 6 plants flowering at the same time, and they can cross the beetroot when it's flowering. But the chances that somebody's left their beetroot to flower isn't as likely. Okay, maybe, there you go. So, cool. Yeah. But and the fact that that's happening in your garden might mean that you're actually developing a variety that's kind of even better, and it might even be developing edible roots on it. You just don't know. So that's really awesome that you are able to kind of have that sense of freedom in your garden, that it doesn't matter what's going on. Like, that's really nice, I reckon.
Well, they also say that if you put your saliva on the seeds too, that changes the whole genetic as well, because whatever your body is lacking, it takes into the plant. And you got a whole new diversity right there.
I wouldn't discount that. I'd probably want a bit more evidence to back that up, but that's cool. Runner beans, really hard to, not really hard, but quite difficult to save seeds from because they'll cross-pollinate with other runner beans. So chances are somebody in your Southland neighbourhood is also growing runner beans. And so if you've got this Takamatua giant white runner bean and everyone else is growing scarlet runner, then you'll probably find after a few years that you stop getting these big white ones and they start getting this scarlet kind of look to them, and then over a time that maybe that'll drift that way, and they might notice the same thing as well. But you could do that in a greenhouse. So it's not impossible, it's just that you have to kind of come up with ways to sort of manage around that a little bit. Carrots are another interesting one. That's strictly speaking, you should have at least 50 carrots going to seed in order to get good seed, preferably 100. And that's just that, making sure that there's enough diversity in that genetic pool that you can keep saving them year after year. You could do it from fewer, but over the years, the quality would deteriorate and it would begin to change, and it might, it wouldn't necessarily express the characteristics that it did when you first grew that carrot.
So they get improved.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Random question: if you just cut off a carrot top and you eat the carrot and you stick the top in the ground, is it going to grow a new carrot?
No, it won't. Well, yes and no. No, it won't. It won't itself grow a carrot that you can eat, but it will go to seed, and then all of those seeds are potentially hundreds of new carrots.
So I can eat the carrots and keep the seed?
You kind of can, but you don't want to eat too much of the carrot, really, because what's going on there is that the root is the storage organ. So the seed in its first year, lots of plants are like this, like biennials, parsnips, carrots, parsley, whatever. So in their first year, the seed grows some leaves, and then it photosynthesizes and it feeds up this great big storage thing in the ground, and then it sits in the ground all winter, and in the next spring it starts to grow again, and it sends up a big flower head, and it flowers and it gets pollinated, and then it makes masses and masses of seeds, and then the whole thing dies, and the seeds fall and they do the same thing again. So they're biennials. They kind of take 2 years to complete their life cycle. So if you eat the whole root, you're limiting the ability of the plant to grow a really good seed head. Carrot breeders will often bite the end off it yes, that's got the perfect characteristics of the carrot that I want to keep. You know, it's sweet enough, it's got just enough carrot flavour, there's no bitterness, whatever. So you can tell. And this one here, you're like, no, it's not so good. So you just eat, you know, you cook that one. This one here you put aside and then you plant it again. But if you eat the whole thing, then you limit its ability.
The reason I'm asking is because at work I've got a little avocado plant in a pot, and I was eating a carrot, and I didn't know, what to do with the compostable bit, and I thought, oh, I'll be just cheeky, I'll just chuck it in the soil next to the avocado, and it will. And then for several months I kept having this carrot that was trying to grow out of it.
Right.
I would keep the leaves off, and the leaves would come out again. And I thought, how long is this thing trying to grow out next to that?
Oh, it's desperate. It's like, oh, it's living, come on. You're like, no. Carrot tops are more nutritious than lots of other green vegetables. If you've got carrot tops growing there, you can munch them and chuck them in your salad or put them in your soup or something. Very good. And rabbits adore them like crazy too. So, and getting into that red category, you start getting things like beetroot, where you need 300 beetroot plants to go to flower at the same time. So that's a bit tricky, and they'll cross with silver beet too. So if there's people in your neighbourhood who are, they've just kind of left their silver beet to go to seed, and then you can't guarantee they'll be okay. Leeks, 50 plants, better to have 100 of those. And they need to be overwintering as well. So you need to grow them in your garden. You don't want to just. That's where you get to the more technical side of things. Like they're called roguing. The first ones that go to seed, you don't really want those ones. You want the ones that last the longest in your garden. So the ones that stay and are the most leaky right through all winter and hold on the longest, and then start flowering. Those are the ones you really want. And so that's why they sort of say you need 100 of them. Because you might end up pulling out 30 or 40 because they're flowering too early. And I don't want an early flowering leek. I want one that will hold on as long as possible so that I know I've always got a good fat leek in the garden all winter and into the spring that I can go and harvest. So I need to be able to pull those ones out and know that I've just pulled them all out because they all went flower too soon. You need to have enough there that you can do that. Plus, they need to be able to spread those genes through that pollen. And you need that number of plants to do it with. They'll also cross with other of the same species of leek too, like there's perennial leeks you get too. They don't often flower, but they sometimes do, and so they will cross with those. Onions, that comes down to genus and species. So with all plants, they have a genus, like all onions are allium. The brown onion you get is called Allium cepa. Spring onions tend to be called Allium fistulosum, so they won't cross-pollinate each other because they're different species of plant. But if you're growing red bunching onions and white Welsh onions, they're both Allium fistulosum, and if they're flowering at the same time, they will cross-pollinate with each other. So you can grow a brown onion and a spring onion and have them flowering at the same time and not be too concerned about that crossing happening. But if you've got red onions and brown onions in both the same species, they'll cross-pollinate. And then when you get down to those brassicas, like I said, fiendishly complicated. They recommend you need at least 300 plants for those. Plus, I was reading just recently, Koanga Institute writing about them, that you also need to take some of those plants and grow them outside the area where you're growing your other ones to let them kind of inbreed a little bit before you bring them back together and share the pollen around again. And I don't understand a lot of the detail behind that. That's kind of well out of my realm of ability to do that. I just haven't got the capacity to deal with that sort of stuff. So ultimately with that kind of thing, it comes down to there's probably, what Kay Baxter was saying is that originally there was probably one village would specialise in growing a particular kind of cauliflower, and another village somewhere else would specialise in growing a type of kale or whatever. And you could swap the seeds around. Hey, we've got masses of this, can we have some of that? And then, everyone grows that same thing, and it's cool. They're not going to get mixed up, and they develop those varieties. But as it stands now, as long as we're happy still eating those varieties of plants, we have to rely on where we're getting them from. And going into the future, it might be that we actually have to accept that we don't have that same diversity of a lot of our food crops, because a lot of them will be too difficult to save seeds from, and maybe we do end up having to be happy that we can go to the garden, pull some kale-like leaves off something that we can also eat the flower heads of, and some of them have got a swollen stem like a kohlrabi, and some of them have got a swollen root. We might just have to accept that, but it might be way down the track. Who knows? I don't know. Whatever. But if we get to that point, I suspect we'll probably be just happy to get whatever we can do, and it won't be that big a deal. Who knows? In a way, it's almost a luxury. What's going on? We're not plugged into the power. Is that what's going on? Or maybe I was just slapping around and waving my arms. Get back. Oh, you need to sign in again, Jules. Sorry. Things like garlic, not really a problem because we propagate those asexually. There's no exchange of pollen involved. They just grow. You pop off a little clove, you chuck it on the ground, and it grows another one of these, right? So no problem. But some garlics do flower, and they make little cool, crazy little miniature garlic seeds. And they probably just the top of the plant would fall over, and they'd fall on the ground, and they'd start growing, and they'd grow a new one. So there's so much interesting diversity and stuff out there. It's really amazing. It's all right. Don't worry too much about that. See if it works.
I was getting that side of it. It just doesn't like the drive.
Tisk. Why ain't I can't? Why can't I do that? Right, where was I? Note to self, write notes on paper next time. I was so organised, making sure that I emailed it to myself so that it's great. Has anybody else got any questions while we're having a sort of a momentary lull?
So the easier vegetables and fruits to grow, can you show us how to take the seeds out of some of those things?
Yes, can. Absolutely. Yep, for sure. So what's going on over here, perfect example, any beans and peas, exactly, they're dry on the vine, you can kind of hear them rattling, you can get them a little bit earlier, but once the plant starts to die off, and it's starting to go brown, you can pull it out and put it somewhere dry, but be aware that rats can be a problem, because we grew Bohemian sugar peas this year, which amazing. I might have mentioned them in my last talk actually. And so they grew about this tall, and they've got pods like this, and fat and crunchy and sweet. Eat the whole pod, unbelievable, just incredible, and so many, just it's ridiculous abundance. And so we were leaving a lot on there, and they were drying off really, really nicely. And then my wife said to me one day, "I think rats are eating our peas." And sure enough, they were cheeky little buggers. They were climbing up the trellis that I had been growing on and eating them in the pods. Unbelievable. So by the time we realised, and we actually saved from them, we had hardly any left. And I was going to have so many, and I was so excited.
Get some cats.
Noob mistake. We've got, cats. Yeah.
Do fruit have babies?
The fruit have babies.
Yes.
That's a good question. Not in the same way that humans have babies. But, this tomato, we could do a birth scene if you like. If someone's got, I haven't got a knife actually, so we could go and get a knife and maybe a cup, please Margaret, would be great. And then we'll do a birth scene. It's not going to be too graphic for anybody, and then that might be able to answer your question a little bit. The fruits have babies. If you could say that from the seed inside the fruit you can grow another tiny little plant, then this is like a baby citrus tree. So yes.
Capsicums do.
Yeah.
Sometimes you find a baby one growing
Inside it, that's right. In fact, we cut open a lemon the other day and it had a sprouting seed inside it. And my son was like, "Oh my goodness, quick, get a pot!" Like, "Oh my God!" We planted it, and since then it's just like nothing. So I think it's probably a bit shocked that we pulled it out of its
Some of
it's
the,
beautiful, yeah, it's the centre. Yeah, hello.
some of the hybrid plants, seeds that you get these days, you can't retake seeds from them.
Okay, so that's not entirely accurate. You can grow seeds. Oh, good job. Thank you. Oh, look, it's lovely, isn't it?
Yeah, good job.
It's so last minute now. So, answering your question. So, yes, you can grow a seed from anything. So, if you have a hybrid tomato, you can take the seeds out of it and you can grow them. But what the tomatoes that you grow on that plant won't necessarily be anything like the tomato that you got them from. So hybridization can be really complicated and involves taking genes from one plant, one species, and from the same species, and purposefully crossing them to get a specific outcome. So it might be a tomato that's been created specifically to make a really, really sweet tomato, like incredibly sweet. And so scientists in the lab have taken the genetic material from a couple and put them together and grown them out and tried them and then found the characteristics that they like. And eventually they make that seed available and people can grow that seed. But because of all of those genetics hiding in the background there, when you save the seed from it and grow that seed, it could express anything. So saying that you can't grow seeds from hybrids, that's not accurate. But they won't necessarily be what you expect. Yeah.
They won't grow at all sometimes?
Not that I'm specifically aware of, but then I haven't tried a lot, and I haven't heard of a lot of people who have tried. There was talk 10 or 15 years ago about scientists developing what they call a terminator gene, so that seeds specifically wouldn't grow again. But as far as I'm aware, that just fizzled out due to widespread horror, and like rejection from the public, because that whole notion is just kind of wrong, really. Yeah.
I was just going to say, none of that terminator stuff or gene splicing is available in New Zealand because we're GE free.
In theory, but that's not necessarily the case either.
And I think the chap was asking before about saving seeds. I wondered whether you could explain about wet seeds and dry seeds.
Yeah, good. Yep. So I'm sorry, I got a little bit distracted from that just before. So seeds that grow in fruits. You get your fruit, and then so then you're basically just opening up the fruit and then finding the seeds inside. There's not that many seeds in this one. They tend to be hanging out in the juicy bit. A few seeds there. Scrape them off into a cup, and then once you've got the seeds out, the rest is good to go. It's more or less the same with tomatoes, capsicums, eggplants. What else do you get that grows in a fruit in the garden?
Strawberries.
Similar, strawberries are a little bit different. They grow, the seeds go on the outside. Feijoas, that kind of thing. Open it up, scoop it out. That's a really nice tomato. And then, once you've got a bunch of seeds in there, top it up with a bit of water, and then leave it for a few days until it forms a scum on the top, and then you wash it through a sieve, carefully, the right size sieve, so your seeds don't fall out, and wash off that scum and wash off that water, so that you're left with the seeds kind of in clear water, and then you can spread them out on a piece of paper or on some tissue paper or something like that, and dry them like that. And when you want to plant them, you can just kind of tear them off and plant them directly. You can also just scoop out the seeds and smear them on a piece of paper as well. I understand that putting them in water and going through that mould process It's partly to sort of replicate the fermentation that would take place in the belly of a creature that ate it. Because anybody here who's got a composting toilet will know that tomatoes grow out of your poop. And that they're designed to do that. So they're designed to be this lovely thing that a creature comes along and goes, yum, that's really nice, I'm going to eat that. And then goes, da-da-da-da, and then tomato plant grows again. So kind of trying to replicate that process. That's part of the kind of natural process that seed goes through in order to be able to germinate. So you don't necessarily have to do it, but it's kind of, and also it sort of thins them out a little bit. So some of them will float and some of them will sink, and so you throw away the ones that are floating all in muck, and you keep the ones that sink. So it sort of weeds out the less viable seeds. So the ones you're left with are more likely to grow. So that's tomatoes. Super, super easy to do. And like I say, you get to eat them as well, so that's pretty cool. Carrots and parsnips, what you want to do with those is at the end of your growing season. So now's kind of a good time to be thinking about that. It depends on whether you've grown carrots as a spring and summer crop, and then they're all mature and you're eating them all, or whether you're growing them as a winter crop and you're not going to eat them all until July or August even. So you want to leave them in the ground. Ideally, you have a way of testing them if you have characteristics that you want from them. So if you've grown one that is a perfect sort of cone shape, and that's what you want them to always be this perfect cone shape, then you'd take them out of the ground and you'd inspect them and you'd choose the ones that were the most perfectly cone shaped. You might snap off the end and taste them to see if they taste good or not. And then you'd store them for a while. Either you can plant them back out in the garden if your garden's not going to get too wet over the winter, but otherwise you can store them in damp sand until spring, and you can go and plant them out again, and then they start to flower. I actually grew carrot seed from a row of carrots. I wasn't too fussed about it. They were Egmont Gold, and they did really well, and they were quite nice carrots, but I don't know how many there were in there. I didn't count. I didn't check any of them to see what they were like. I just knew that the ones that I'd eat were quite nice. And I left them go to seed, and from this bed of carrots like this big, is just like tens of thousands of carrot seeds. Unbelievable. So we just, this year, it's like carrots everywhere because we've got so much seed. And they've grown really nice carrots this year. And so the ones of those that we kind of like the best, we'll leave those in the ground, or we'll plant them again. But I'm not too fussed about this notion of calling them Egmont Gold or not. In fact, I'm quite keen to bring in some other carrot varieties and have them flowering at the same time, so that I can get this mix-up happening, genetic mix, so that I don't end up with this kind of locked into this narrow range of genetics. So that's what I was talking about before, about that kind of, the notion of like heritage and heirloom stuff. It's like, we shouldn't just hold on to that stuff just because we always have. Some of them, there's a blimmin' good reason why. Because that squash is just amazing and it's so delicious. And if you start messing around with it, you could lose it. And you're like, oh, damn, none of them are as good as that one was anymore. So it's a bit of a, who knows. But it's only kind of now that we really have the luxury of kind of going, I didn't want to grow that particular variety. I would like to grow this one here that's come from this other part of the world. Once upon a time, you'd just be happy to have something growing in the garden. And I kind of feel like maybe we're losing that luxury a little bit. Maybe we need to be able to broaden ourselves a little bit.
What causes carrots to have many legs?
A bunch of things. It could be that the soil's too dry, and so they're kind of looking around for moisture, or you're watering them too much on the surface, so they're not encouraged to kind of go deep to look for water. Soil might be too rich, and so they're kind of like hitting pockets of like manure or something in your soil, and they're like, who knows? I think it's, if your soil's nice and fine and sort of even and whatnot, then they should be able to grow nice and straight. Anybody else got an answer to that question?
Sorry, I didn't quite get the question.
Why do carrots sometimes grow forked?
Yeah.
We've got properly fresh animal manure in your garden, in your soil, which you avoid with root crops, because it encourages the fall.
Yeah, so right, so sheep pellets could be that, yeah. So you know, you get into a kind of a rotational system where you use your sheep pellets around something that really likes that, broccoli or lettuce or something, and that uses that up, so that when you follow it up with your carrots, it's not too much. Yeah. So you often might get the same thing like where you get masses and masses of tops and not much root on them as well. Often the soil is just too rich. So, like our challenge at the Environment Centre in terms of seed saving is that what we want to be able to do is to kind of coordinate seed supply. So we know that we have had in our possession some really cool varieties of things that are quite special to Southland, that Henry Harrington has saved for 60 years and that his family had saved for however many decades before that, and that grew really well here. Luckily, the Coanga Institute still has a lot of those varieties available, and so what we're quite keen to do is to source those again and then find people who can grow them for us and who can bulk them up. And probably starting off with things that are a lot less complicated to save seeds from, because I don't personally know anybody that has the time, space and skill level to grow enough of some of the things I've been talking about, including myself, by a long stretch. And so supporting organisations like the Coanga Institute is actually probably essential, because they're the only organisation, one of 2 or 3 maybe in New Zealand, who are actually preserving varieties of things like broccoli and cauliflower and beetroot and that stuff that is quite complicated to save seed from. So we can do as much as we can, but ultimately we still need to be giving our support to organisations like that, because they've got the expertise and they've got the space and the systems to do it, but they need the kind of the financial resource to be able to support them to do that. But we can, at the Environment Centre, we can and do what I'm doing now, trying to help people learn about saving seed, and to try and encourage people and also keep records of who's growing what and where it is, so that, in a way you can kind of go, oh hey, you remember how you got that from us, and it'd be really great if you could send some back, because, and then they're like, oh yeah, about that, whatever. But one of the programs that we're trying to work on too is developing a social enterprise, so that we can actually train people to grow seed on contract and pay them to do it, so that we can keep all of that money that people spend on seeds in our region, instead of it going wherever it goes, and ultimately a lot of it just goes overseas. So there's no reason at all why we couldn't have Southland grown seeds available in Southland shops and be channeling that money into our communities and people in our communities who are keen to do it. And it doesn't have to be super complicated stuff. I mean, it could just be beans and peas, for example. But then we might find that there's somebody who lives in a more remote rural area who knows that they could grow a large quantity of something, and who has got the time and effort and they want to put into it, but they just don't kind of know how to do it. Well, we want to be able to help them to take that step. And so, if we can get the seeds and then we can sort of meet up. One of the things I'm kind of hoping that we might be able to develop here somehow is a group of people who are keen to do more seed saving, so that we can provide seed, and we can provide support and encouragement and opportunities for people to get together and share what they're learning and share what they're experiencing, right through the whole process of sowing, growing and saving the seeds. Because only one person really needs to grow one lettuce plant, and then you've got enough seeds in that for everybody in the whole room to grow a lettuce plant. And then everybody in the whole room grows a lettuce plant, and you've got enough seeds for like the whole of Invercargill to grow a lettuce plant. So there's some things that we should be focusing on that we should not have to spend money on buying from some company somewhere else. We should be able to do so much more of that ourselves. And we at the Environment Centre want to be able to help to make that happen. We can't make that happen, but we want to help people to work together to make it happen. One of the challenges with the Seed Savers Network is that a lot of our seed growers are from all over the country. There's not actually that many of them in Southland, let alone Riverton. And it's kind of hard to get together, and I emailed everybody and I was like, how's it going? And then, who knows, my email maybe went to their spam folder, or they were just too busy and they didn't. And so, I don't know, and so some of them might send some seed back and some of them might not, or some of them might have got seed from us that didn't even germinate, because we've got a lot of seed that's actually just getting too old to grow now. And we kind of need to know that, and if I had a group that I could kind of meet with and coordinate with, then we'd know that stuff, and we could actually build something quite vibrant from it. And I think I put here, is this the only sustainable model, actually paying people to do it? Probably, for some stuff. Yeah, I think it is. Because you need the time and the energy to focus on it. And if you're constantly thinking about your job, or you've got to, all the other things that make your life busy and stressful, it means that this is kind of coming second. And if that's coming second, then the quality isn't necessarily going to be there. So if we can pay people and we can build that into how they earn their livelihood, then it's surely going to be a good thing. So that was what I was thinking. Whoever's keen, your challenge is, what are you going to do? You're going to form a group, you're going to set some kind of goal, you're going to collaborate with us, just have a go and do some stuff, maybe. There's lots of information out there. I would highly recommend Coang Institute, but when you start reading their stuff, it gets really heavy really, really fast. And they start kind of talking about if you're not prepared to do this, then there's no point bothering. And so you've got to bear in mind that you might come across that quite quickly with the Coang Institute. And because they're all about organic and regenerative and nutrient dense, and that starts getting super heavy as well. And so if you're kind of not really already quite deeply into that, then that can get a bit overwhelming and a bit intense. Well, we can make sure all of these links as well. Setha's Seeds, that's kind of like an offshoot of Coanga. That's a private social enterprise that's happening in the North Island. Eco Seeds in Wellington, they're certified organic. They've got a really realistic, simple range. When you look at the King Seed catalogue, you go, wow, they've got 200 tomatoes. Eco Seeds, they've got 5 tomatoes. And that's probably all you actually need, really, You don't really need 200, and they're all different shapes and sizes and whatever. It's like,
Now, can I just interrupt? If people do want to take it further, when you're saying about if there was an interested group, South Alive can be the contact for that to just kind of...
That's what I was hoping you'd say.
Yeah, of course you would.
Yeah.
And when there's enough interested people in our community, like I said, we went from an urban gardening workshop to seed saving, and we've got a lot of interest, that we can do that and then just sort of take that next step with you. There's
cool.
this resource information here, but I've kind of explained, we have some action groups like beautification, fruit and nut as well, but this would certainly sit as another subgroup that we can support too.
And then, people could be going to people's gardens and giving each other ideas and,
So it sort of comes from the interest, so,
Exactly.
community-led. So by getting in touch with myself or Claire or info@southalive.org.nz, just coming back and say, hey, I'm really keen, I want to take that further after tonight, then we can just help that to happen.
I've probably been talking way too long as well. I just quickly wanted to show you, hopefully this will work. This is Otapoti Urban Organics, which is in Dunedin, and they've got the Symbiosis Seed Exchange. Sounds great, it's not an exchange, it's just a business. What are you laughing about? That is not an exchange. It's an exchange, I exchange some seeds, you give me some money. But what they are doing is they contract growers to grow a particular variety. So they've got one person who grows their leeks. And so every year that person can focus on improving those leeks. That's their job. It's to grow as many of these amazing leeks and save the seeds from them as possible. That's their job. That's what they do. So there's always those seeds out there. There's vulnerabilities with that too. So they've got quite a nice selection. But they've got one kind of leek. It's a good leek. They call it Tyree Giant. It's probably a Carentan Giant or a Swiss Giant or something that they've grown, and someone in Tyree is the grower, and they've grown it there for enough years that they're kind of like, let's just call it our own thing now. Cool, great. And so they grow it year after year after year, and it's becoming acclimatised to that region. One kind of leek, it's enough. There's 2 kinds of kale. You don't need 10 different types of kale, really, do you? Honestly, I wouldn't bother with Black Beauty because I think it's the most mealy, disgusting, poorly flavoured zucchini ever. And we grow much nicer ones at our place. I would never bother growing Black Beauty. Just so bog standard. Everybody grows them. They're like, oh, whatever. Once you grow Cocozelle or something like that, then you go, aha, that's what a zucchini is meant to taste like. It actually tastes good, even when it's this big. It tastes amazing.
What was that, sorry?
Cocozelle.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and they're lovely, beautiful. Oh, I don't know why people bother Black Beauty. Anyway, so you only need one type of pickling cucumber. Do you need all these other ones? That's why I wanted to show you that. And Sentinels Group. Now this is an organisation that's made up of a bunch of people working together, and they are really big on these land races and masses of genetic diversity. And I thought I'd show you that too, because they're trying really hard to collect all of these heritage varieties and then kind of do stuff with them. So a good example that I saw was the beetroot. Where was that? Lost it. It was right there. Give me a moment. They're also growing potatoes from seed as well. Not seed potatoes, but the seed that grows in the potato fruit. And that's really cool and interesting as well. And that's how you get new varieties, because the potato that grows, if you've ever noticed, your potatoes grow and they flower, and then sometimes they have these little green tomato-like fruits on them. So inside them are seeds that you can grow that will grow a new kind of potato. Might be really similar to the one that you harvested, originally. Might be really different. So they're really, really into that. Root crops. So they talk about, so like this carrot here, they're talking about how they've been growing for ages and ages, and the person who was growing it forgot what name it was. Sorry. So they gave it a new one. Cool. And then over the year, they're selecting it for sweetness and flavour, so they taste each carrot before replanting back for flowering and late seed production, right? And then they've added to Ben Horne's genetics by using St. Valerie and Kuroda to cross-pollinate with them. But they're still selecting them for sweetness and flavour. So you're going to get an amazing, sweet, flavourful carrot. And by introducing these other genetics, it just kind of builds the resilience within that seed line and the capacity of those seeds to cope with changes in conditions. And because some of those seeds might do really well when it's a bit drier, and other ones might prefer it when it's wetter. So they're really, really focusing on these different approaches. I don't know what happened to the beetroot I was reading about. It must have been somewhere else. Anyway, so the beetroot, they're talking about the same thing. They've taken like 4 or 5 different heritage varieties, and they're growing them all together at the same time. And then they say, you can buy seeds from them. You buy the leek seed, and it says, what you will find is some of these will grow really tall and skinny, some will grow short and fat, there'll be everything all in between. And that's diversity. So when you get a really hard frost, some of them might not like it that much, other ones might be totally fine. When it's really, really dry, some of them might just go straight to seed, others might not. And you don't necessarily get that level of ability to cope with varied conditions when you're just growing that same genetic line, especially if it's from a narrow pool of plants in the first place. So that's where you start sort of thinking about, is it better to desperately cling to this one last variety of this particular thing, or do we bring in something else to kind of bring it back to life and shake it up and let it keep going? I don't know, that's for the real aficionados to kind of debate that kind of stuff. I think from my perspective, it's like, does it work? Does it produce food? That's what I'm most interested in. So this is my garden at home, and I just thought it might be useful just for people to get a bit of context of where some of these things are. So these are lettuces. There's like 5 or 6 lettuces here. Lettuces are really easy to save seed from. You don't need a large population. You don't really need to separate them too much from other lettuces. So these are just in the end of the garden. There's like zucchini here, and there's just recently planted cabbages, and then we've sown some other winter green thing in the middle there. And so they're just there, and they're flowering, and they'll attract some bees, and they'll provide an ecosystem service to organisms with pollen and nectar and stuff. And at the same time, we can keep an eye on them, and we can save some seeds from them. Yeah.
So with the lettuce, do you cut the lettuce off and then let it grow to go to seed?
Yeah, well, we picked leaves off it. Yep. So most of the lettuces we grow are kind of like open ones. We don't tend to grow the closed heads. They're a bit trickier because often what happens is the seed head's trying to get through and it can't, and sometimes it'll rot. And they sort of suggest you cut the top of it open to let the seed head pop out. But we tend to grow these leafy ones that you just keep picking. I mean, they're fantastic. I'm always kind of like, why just cut a lettuce off and eat it in a salad when you could go pick, eat the salad, and then go back again a week later and it's got more leaves to eat. So we tend to focus on those types. So what will happen is they'll flower for a while, they'll start to dry off and die off a little bit, and then we'll keep an eye on it. We can, because they're in our intensive garden right outside our house, so we walk past it all the time. So we can keep a close eye on it. We'll probably have to put some stakes on them, tie them up, because our garden gets quite windy. Other people might find the same thing. So. I didn't put it in here, but I've got another red lettuce that's, it's like this, and then it went like that, and then it's kind of gone like that again, and then it's fallen over, and so it's, sort of all over the place, but it's still flowering. So yeah, once they start to dry off, we'll cut them, tip them carefully into a bag, kind of like this, and then hang it up in the shed to dry, so that as they dry, the seeds fall out and we can collect them in the bottom. So this is cress in here, and maybe, we can have a look at that more closely. So I know can't really hear it, but in the bottom of the bag. No, it's like just kind of like a leafy salady plant. Yeah. And to be honest, the only reason I saved the seed from it was so that I could take it to seed saving workshops, because I can't actually be bothered with cress. It's like, it goes to seed so fast, and it's not actually, I don't think it was that tasty. It was okay, but whatever. But it's good to have stuff that you can show people what to do. I know other people might like it. It was in a mix of, like a mesclun mix, where you get like endive and lettuce and cress, and the cress just goes boom straight to seed, and everything else is still just growing. It's kind of like, what's the point? You can't cut it all at the same time. It just seems ridiculous. Anyway, this is lupins here, so this is what you've been helping to shell. So we tie those up, and they're in a spot that's kind of at the end of the garden as well, so there's still plenty of space in there for us to be growing some crops in there. And we like the blue lupin because it's a good winter green crop. You sow it on any empty garden over the winter, and it just grows slowly, and if you pull one out and look at the roots, they are just thick with these lumps all over them, and those lumps are like little houses for nitrogen fixing bacteria. And they suck the nitrogen from the atmosphere, and there's heaps of it in the atmosphere. They suck it in, and then they make it available to the plant, and you cut it, and they go, and they make it all available to the soil and to your crops. And blue lupins are just amazing, and broad beans too. They're just incredible for the amount of nodules on them. They just look so ugly. It's amazing. Nodules all over them. This is daikon, the daikon radish. So if anybody knows daikon radish, it's the most amazing radish. They easily grow like this big and stay sweet and crunchy and amazing even when they're monstrously huge. And you can pickle them, you put them in kimchi, and they're so good. Stir fries and all sorts. So much food from such a small area. Incredible. But they take up so much space in the garden. Like there's a tiny little chick here, a little baby chick for scale. So they're huge, and we've had to tie them up so many times. They fall all over the place, but we've had them seeding at our place 2 years in a row, and they just naturalised. They just come up all over the place now. So we harvested so many daikon this last season that we never even planted, because they're just self-seeding. And you go out and to collect them, and inevitably you drop a bunch, and and we do it on purpose too, just kind of like this, and they're all over the place. But if you want to save the seeds, you've got to put in a really strong stake and tie them up really well so that they'll handle it. And then when they start drying off, like this, maybe you guys want to have a look. Try popping one open and see if you can get the seed, if you can actually get the seed out of it. Yeah, share it around and have a little try, because some of these sorts of things, they can be that one there looks like it's quite dry. And you think to yourself, oh, that's not too bad. You just kind of crack it open and pop one out, but it was just one. Oh yeah, I know.
And then it's got one in it.
Hundreds and hundreds.
Oh, hundreds.
And there'll be a few in that one. So it's like, oh hell, how do I actually process that many of those things? Well, what you do is you put them in a bag like that, and then you go like that, and you crunch on them and stuff them down, and you put them in a big half barrel, and you get your friends around to jump on them, and you get your kids into it, and
So you just pop them open, really.
pretty much, yeah. And then you find these little tiny little seeds inside. Yes. Anyway, there's enough there if anybody wants to take some home.
Yeah.
And what else?
So can you
Rambling?
plug it now?
That's kind of more or less. I should probably wrap up.
Well, I was just thinking, a stretch and a cup of tea and a muffin, and then if there's any burning questions.
Yeah, you were going to say about the wet and dry.
Yeah, okay, cool. So, I mean, the wet stuff like the tomato, there's that. The dry stuff, it's kind of like what you're doing. This is coriander. You pick it when it's looking kind of relatively dry, put it somewhere where it's going to stay dry, because they'll go mouldy if you leave them somewhere damp. We'll often stick them in the sort of shelf up above our fire, and they dry out really well up there. We'll hang them in the shed, they dry there as well. And then when they're like this, basically, if somebody wants to have a go. And so in fact, maybe what we'll do is we'll make a bit of space on the floor, I'll put my mat down, and everyone can actually have a go. That'd be good, eh? And you can have a go rubbing some coriander and going, oh,
I'd just like to invite you all to, we've got a cup of tea there, and we've also got some supper, and you can see how inspiring Nick is, and I'm so sorry we couldn't get your PowerPoint off for the start, but man, you've made up for it in every form.
Great.
And inspiring, and I think just those reminders about those pollinators and what they get up to out there too, that was a really good take home as well, and that lettuce seeds are one of the things that you could try if you wanted to try something and be successful.
Yep. And also,
that's one of the key take home.
some recent research showed too that growing your own lettuces is a massive carbon reduction on buying lettuce.
Yeah.
This research kind of compared a lot of stuff, and they sort of found that quite a lot of things, there's not a huge difference between growing your own and buying it in terms of carbon footprint. But like salads, lettuces and stuff, massive difference.
So please have a cup of tea and some supper, and continue to informally yarn to Nick. We've also got Anna down the back there. Give a wave, Anna. And Margaret, who's got a heap of knowledge too. So just feel free to have a chat to any of them just informally as we have a cup of tea and wind down now.
I've got a burning question before everybody starts talking, but I wanted everybody to hear. Mick, you were talking about, hybridising things, and there is a whole lot of what you're talking about going on in the world, and we're getting all these new amazing varieties coming. I was a little concerned when you said that they were splicing genes. I don't think that's here in New Zealand. We've got really robust laws, regulations and testing to make sure that doesn't come here. If it does, somebody at South Alive, let them know that Mole wants to know about it, because I'll take it to Parliament.
Yeah, for sure. No, you're quite right. Yeah, but it doesn't.
I don't think there is. I think it's rumours, but I haven't seen any direct evidence.
And it's something that would be hard to totally prevent. I know that we have quite a lot of good controls over it. But you may think of the quantity of seed that does get imported, and the chances of there being some kind of genetic drift involved in where those seeds are produced coming here. I mean, it's entirely possible that there is genetically modified stuff
They
here.
do watch for that, and some decades ago, a friend of mine, Jeanette Fitzsimons, took them to task because there was something like 1%
Yep.
in all the corn seed that came to New Zealand, so they stopped the whole.
Yeah.
They were talking of growing genetically engineered pastries in the Environment Council. I haven't heard anything on that lately. Do you know anything about it?
No, I haven't heard anything about that. No.
Everything's gone very quiet.
Yeah, it has.
Genetic
Yeah.
engineering. I've approached the Labour Party. They're not saying anything. I can't get any answers.
I know on the wish page, people are getting seeds, or people are just receiving seeds in their mailbox and planting them, and they just turned out to be like really bad seeds, like really invasive seeds.
Could be attempts to bring it
Okay.
All right.
Thank you, Nick. Time is against us now. I know you're really interested, and you've been given the offer of chatting amongst yourselves, and don't please grab Nick and push him into a corner and keep him to yourself.
I'll fight back.
And the Housing Action Group's next meeting is on the 3rd Tuesday of April, and we're talking about apartment living opportunities. There was an article in the paper just the Monday about a government bill that's going to be changing the unit titles process. So we won't go into that too much of that, but we will have people who've lived in apartments and we'll be talking to you about it. So, a cup of tea, it's a self-service, the hot water's on the end of the tap, and there's milk and sugar.